Thanks. Mark Cohen from IFPRI, and thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Two questions, neither of which are about property rights, but about two of the other pillars. First, on access to justice, it seems to me that in order to have access to justice for poor people, there needs to be access to legal services, whether that's provided directly by the state, whether there is some sort of public interest bar, perhaps through civil society, or whether there is an institution within the government. In Brazil, there is a Ministerio Público, which acts on behalf of citizens on good days. In India, you have NGOs like the People's Union for Civil Liberty and other organizations that provided legal services, for example, in the Right to Food case, which is sort of more or less on IFPRI's agenda. Could you talk a bit about that and how that's covered in the report? And the second question is on the business rights pillar. I believe it was Anatole France who said the law in its majestic equality forbids both the rich and the poor from sleeping underneath bridges. I noticed in one of your slides that the expansion of legal persona was one of the elements there, and actually here in the United States we've gotten into a lot of trouble by expanding legal persona. So a corporation of any size, a sole proprietorship run by a microcredit recipient or a transnational, has a complete legal persona and all the rights given to individuals, and so that may actually frustrate the legal empowerment of the poor. So if you could speak to that issue as well. Thanks.
My name is Toa Daj Mogus, also from IFPRI. And listening to your presentation, I was thinking, sort of going back and forth between some elements of the instrumental value of what you refer to as legal empowerment, instrumental from the perspective maybe of the development economist, in the sense of material welfare of the poor, and instrumental values, which, the intrinsic values, which may actually lump also instrumental values from other perspectives, access to justice as a value in and of itself and so forth. And my question, thinking about the instrumental dimension, was about, trying to think now what I wanted to ask you, I'm sorry. Okay, let me put it this way, actually. It's a bit of a strange question. What do you think are the conditions under which a country, a government, and a state can actually thrive on this instrumental dimension, material welfare, specifically also talking about the poor, without actually providing these types of rights, without legal empowerment? At least, I mean, legal empowerment is a very broad term. You really captured many different facets. Let's say a country that would fail on many of these fronts. And I admit this is a strange question. I'm thinking of both those governments that have thrived, that have provided material welfare to their poor, having failed various dimensions of this, as well as those governments which would like to be able to deliver in terms of reducing poverty without having to go there. So this is sort of where my question is coming from.
You correctly recognize our report says that in the informal sector, people are doing lots of things right. They have what we might call informal social contracts at work, which are not yet laws and which we can build on. And that's a major part of our argument. In fact, that's a part of the work that DeSoto is not known for, but has done a lot on. In fact, in Chapter 2, Realizing Human Rights, in a book he co-edited with Francis Chenival, Chapter 2 is completely on the archetypal, or the, if you like, the informal social contracts which Tanzanians are in fact using on a daily basis. For example, they have a little piece of paper which is their property right. That's their deed. That piece of paper, however, is only recognized in that village with that chief. So their property has no value in the next door village, because that piece of paper is not recognized by the next chief. But if you had a drawing from how they do that, and you had a national registry system, and you had a national policy, land policy, and a national market, you right away, just within Tanzania, the property of that piece of value will go 100-fold. Because the markets will change, the value will change, its ability to be productive and so on, its ability to produce things that people can buy, everything will change. So that's thanks for acknowledging and for seeing that. Now I will have to use your phrase. This is a great one. Watch where the people walk. The Soto, in fact, watch where the dogs were urinating in the fields in Bali. The people there said, we all grow paddy. We don't know where one stops. And how on earth are you going to get property rights here? And he says, well, the dogs know, because when I was walking across, every time I crossed from one person's land into another person's land, a different dog barked. So there are all kinds of informal ways of knowing about these things. And I'll come back and talk a little bit about this power issue towards the end. But this is, for me, the heart of where the challenge is. But first, let's talk about Mark's very interesting challenges and the French approach to human rights, right? Yeah, that's a well-known one. On the first question, the access to legal services issue. Again, necessary but not sufficient, right? The Lord Denning, master of the rolls, British bars in the United Kingdom, written many books on law and law professor. He once said that justice must be above the law. And this is one of the arguments we are making here. So yes, we have outlined a whole range of what is preventing poor people from accessing legal services, including affordability, the issue of legal services in public provision of legal services, pro-poor legal services, civil society, paralegals, alternative dispute resolutions. And in fact, all we did was to make an inventory. We didn't discover anything new because so much is happening in that field. All the donors are funding huge programs on alternative justices, access to justice programs, World Bank, Justice for the Poor, Canadian Seed, and others are all doing that. So we made a sort of an inventory, and we said, draw from these countries as you see fit, but you got to go beyond that. And let's talk now about what you have to do beyond that. And that's where we started to talk about where does access to justice demand more than the provision of legal services, changing of the pro-poor laws, the anti-poor laws, and we went on the political system, the power issues. Take the issue of land. When the willing buyer, willing seller philosophy was adopted, we all know that what had happened in that assumption, led by our friends across the road and so on, and many of them are my very good friends as well, is that they underestimated the economic power of large landlords and sort of overestimated the power of local poor people. And that power issue goes right through the justice issue. When the Chief Justice of the Philippines said to me, I am going to change the philosophy of the courts of this country, and we will now talk about liberty and prosperity. The reason he wanted to talk about liberty and prosperity was that liberty is the traditional domain of the courts, i.e. civil and political rights. The Constitution speaks largely about, the issues of justice, of political and civil rights and so on. And they typically leave economic, cultural, and social rights to the policymaker. Well, he came to the conclusion that my courts will never be able to discharge justice if I had people so poor as they were in the Philippines. Just couldn't find it. And to think about liberty without thinking of poverty was in fact a vainglorious profession. So on that one, on the issue of legal persona, we have, I guess, we might be sending some poor countries to suffer the way Americans have suffered, but in creating wealth. Nevertheless, we have argued that when a poor person does not distinguish between himself and his business, so that when he goes bankrupt, his business goes bankrupt, he is also bankrupt as a person. We got a big problem, right? And that's the kind of argument. I don't know if this argument is familiar to all, but many poor people, they don't distinguish between what they work for every day. They don't add that labor value separately. So if they go bankrupt, they lose everything. In the extreme cases, their children are pawned. And that's how you get child labor. You know, their daughters are sold, and so on and so on. And we are saying there has to be bankruptcy protection for the poor like we have. Why can't we think of a limited liability corporation concept applicable to the poor so that they can be less risk averse and have some protections from the state and so on? Now, there will be winners and losers, and there will be some problems. But we think the advantages will be much greater than the disadvantages of pursuing this thing as well. Again, the issue, forgetting the business people, the individuals who don't exist legally, again, there might be some advantages to not having a legal identity, but we were convinced as a commission that overwhelmingly people will have more advantages than disadvantages. Yes, there will be some who probably, and the Asian Development Bank has put out what I think is the best report on legal identity and economic performance. It's a really good report, and they have shown where you have these negatives and why legal identity can have a perverse impact as well. On the countries that would succeed and fail, and I will try to give you a non-strange answer. You know, let's take land again. That's a common asset and very relevant to our colleagues here. A good friend of mine who has been an advisor to 3 prime ministers in Japan. He and I are co-authors, well, not co-authors, but we are writing different chapters of a book that will come out before long from the United Nations University Press on the role of civil society in legal empowerment. We had a chance to chat. And he said once Indira Gandhi was visiting Japan, and he, as advisor to the prime minister, was in the room. And while the prime minister had to take a state call, he had a chance to chat privately with Mrs. Gandhi, and she asked him, you know, what would you advise? If you were my advisor, if like you advise your prime minister in Japan, if you were my advisor in India, what would you advise me to do to make India's development accelerate? And he said, I said to her, I only have a minute, so I'll give you a very short answer. I hope you don't mind. Before the prime minister gets off the phone. And the answer is, allow Japan to occupy India for a few decades. Now, there was a profound thinking behind that. And the reason was, he was hinting on the American occupation of Japan. Well, at first I was sort of stunned myself, but then he explained. And he did explain to the prime minister of Japan later on, and the prime minister never try that again. You know, it violates protocol and everything else. But Indira Gandhi took it very well, apparently. And what he was saying is that the land reforms of Japan would never have worked or could have been put into place if it were not because of that occupation. So in South Korea and Taiwan, they didn't have an occupation of that kind, but they did the same kinds of land reforms, and they credit their success today with the basic land reforms. But you had to have state policies which guaranteed state loans, which made the assets productive, and a whole range of other factors. Take Ethiopia. And the reason I take Ethiopia is because I asked the minister responsible for lands, the Minister of Agriculture, when I was doing our consultations in Ethiopia, what kind of an economy are you running in this country? Is this a state planning economy, a socialist, centrally planned economy, or are you using a market economy model in Ethiopia? No. I mean, those of you who know Ethiopia will know that that's a tricky question, right? And he recognized that right away. Because individuals are not able to own land in Ethiopia. And in fact, Prime Minister Meles had said, and I quote, Ethiopians, we will have private individual property rights in this country only over my dead body. Now, the reasoning behind that seems to be, and they told me this, the minister did say, the day we make land available and title it and give them full title and ownership of that land, 10% of Ethiopians, most of them coming from abroad, will come back to this country and own the whole country. I don't know if that's true or not. It's a political issue, right? So I said, all right. Then he turned to me and he said, of course we are running a market-oriented economy in Ethiopia. So I said, but Minister, land is your major asset apart from your people. And if it can't participate in market transactions efficiently, then how are you going to run a market economy? He said, come on, you know better than that. We can have user rights of various kinds. We can have lease, 33 years lease, 99 years lease. So we're doing it. It's working. It's working well. And it might work very well. And we have not argued that individual private property rights is necessary for growth and so on. So that's another example. There are different conditions in different countries that will make this model work or make it fail. The model itself, as I have presented it, is a holistic approach to change. The whole model will never be tried anywhere, I don't think. Elements of it will be tried. Elements of the same thing are perhaps already ongoing. But so I cannot say that this model, there are certain conditions in some countries which will make it better able to work than others. Essentially, at the end of the day, what we are talking about is about the role of institutions in poverty reduction. That's basically what we are talking about, and focusing in on institutions as legal rules, and trying to get down to that issue of it. I've asked Douglas North. I've said to him, and he said, call him Doug. I mean, it's very difficult to call this guy Doug, but nevertheless, he's very. For those of you who met him, he's a very jolly fella. And now he's writing on a theory. His current project, is a theory to explain all of human history. And that's what the project is in fact called. I don't know if you've seen it. He's working with the World Bank to do this. And, the biggest confusion I think that he created, and I told him that in the world, is he distinguished between two things, institutions and organizations, that hardly anybody distinguish between these days, and they confuse the two all the time. And we are trying to, in this conversation, to be pretty strict about what we mean by institution. In a way, I don't know that I've answered your question. You did say it was a strange one. I hope I've contributed to your understanding of it.